Good morning, children. How was your day? Yesterday, I mean. Fine. Today, we are going to discuss the part 2 of the chapter what we have started from Politics of India since Independence. The chapter Era of One Party Dominance. This chapter basically, the first topic of this chapter we are dealing with challenge of building democracy. Fine. Nation building we discussed in last chapter. Nation building, as we know, this was accompanied by the challenge of instituting democratic politics, means the system of politics under our democracy. And what became evident here? Electoral competition among different or several political parties. Fine. And it began just after independence, just after Indian independence. Now, here we shall be discussing Challenge of Building Democracy Part 2, the first decade of electoral competition. Yesterday, what we have finished, that how difficult was the process, how difficult was this process, and why did our leaders, why did our freedom fighters, they decided to choose a difficult path. And we discussed that differences, conflicting aspirations, different opinions are quite obvious. And their answer is democratic politics. Yes, children. Democratic politics provides us every possible answer. Okay. And ultimate purpose is, it must be and it should be public interest. So, our leaders had decided to take this particular path. Now, we are going to discuss the way our constitution framing started, and then we adopted it, it got signed, it came into effect, and thereafter our first step of electoral competition. Fine. So, a constitution, the work, the most pious work that had been started by our Constituent Assembly way back in 1946, our constitution was ready and it was adopted on November 26, 1949. It got signed by January 24th, 1950, very next year, and it came into effect on January 26th, 1950, our first republic. Okay, and remember that by the time, since independence, our country was ruled by interim government. Yes, children, interim government means when we don't have the full-fledged government, election has not taken place, or even if election had conducted, election is due to take place, and a government must continue for the time being. So you can say it even the caretaker government. Those days we had interim government. Country was ruled by interim government. Fine. So what was urgent now? What was necessary now? That our first democratically elected government we need to have in our country. Despite the fact constitution had laid down every possible rules, but machines, its machinery had to be put in place. Okay, so we thought initially that it is very easy for us. In a couple of months, we will start we will start. We'll fix everything. Election will be conducted. Results should be declared, and we will have a democratically elected government. But it was not so. It was not so easy, in fact. For this purpose, Election Commission of India was required, and it was set up. In the same month, January 1950, Election Commission of India was set up. Yes, children. And our first chief election commissioner was Mr. S.K. Sen, Mr. Sukumar Sen. He does have the tag of India's first CEC, first Chief Election Commissioner. Who is the present Chief Election Commissioner of India? I want the answer from you children. Okay, find its answer. Do tell me by the end of the class, or if not you are able to tell by the end of the class, then tomorrow. So we expected that in the same year our first general election would take place, 1950. Fine. Did it really happen? Did election take place in the year 1950? When election commission came into existence and it started its work, the election commission came to know, it discovered that it is not so easy to hold a free and fair election, to conduct a free and fair election in a country of continental size. That is a country, but size is of continent. So, holding an election, the first requirement was now of election that boundaries of electoral constituency, boundaries of parliamentary constituency or assembly constituency must be drawn. That is delimitation or drawing of boundaries of the electoral constituencies. Fine children? Simultaneously, voters list, electoral roll need to be prepared. Okay? Electoral rolls need to be prepared. This was our two most significant requirement. Fine. Then the work started. Both these tasks, both these challenges, both these assignment took enough time. And when the first draft of the voters list of the electoral rolls was published, what we came to know, what election commission came to know, that nearly 40 lakh women were not recorded in the list. 40 lakh women had not been recorded in this list. Okay, and because 40 lakh women had not been recorded, they were simply listed as wife of or daughter of. Just imagine, in place of somebody's name, in place of my name, if it is written son of or husband of, that is not my identity. And in your official documents, can't believe this. And that too, if it happens to be the voter list. Election Commission didn't accept it. Election Commission refused to accept all these entries and then ordered a revision. Ordered that it must be revised if possible, and ordered simultaneously for deletion if necessary. If you could revise, you are finding it possible, go for revision, do revise it. If not, go for its deletion, delete it. So, preparing for the first general election was a huge task, was a mammoth exercise. Because before it in the world, no election on this scale, on this level, had been conducted. This was going to be the first election on this large scale, to this extent. Their numbers or the data, you will come to know, you will realize it, that we had 17 crore eligible voters. And these 17 crore eligible voters, only 15% were literate. Means 85% of 17 crore eligible voters were illiterate, and they had to elect about 3,200 MLAs and 489 members of Lok Sabha, MPs of Lok Sabha. Fine. As a result, election commission had no other way to think some special method, some different method, some unique method of voting. And for this purpose, because first time election was going to be held, going to be conducted, election commission started training over 3 lakh officers and polling staff, so that election must be conducted smoothly, election must be conducted in a free and fair manner. Are you getting, children? Yes. So the way we are finding nowadays, and we start looking for its cons rather, not pros. We are looking for its negativities, what went wrong. This was the way our election, the process of election started in our country, and one we are finding nowadays. See the difference. But that was the beginning of a journey. Fine. Now, what had been the unique feature of the election of our country? Or first general election, their unique feature. Size of the country and the electorate. The way we are going to vote. This made our election unusual, exceptional. And it was the first general election, the first big test of democracy in a country that was a poor country, that was an illiterate country. So it was first big test of democracy in a poor and illiterate country, India. Fine. Till then, democracy had existed only in prosperous countries. By the time it existed only in prosperous countries, countries of Europe or North America. And in those countries, almost everyone was literate. There was no problem of illiteracy there. By the time, many countries in Europe, but they were literate, but they hadn't given. So many countries of Europe had not given voting rights to all women. And since our very first election, we believed, we decided to go for universal adult franchise. Our experiment was with universal adult franchise, that we will give voting rights to each and every Indian citizen. One age criteria we fixed, be it male or female, be it rich person or poor person, be it a vegetable seller, be it a daily wage laborer, means no other barriers except the age criteria we kept. So it was really a bold step, it was a risky step, but we took. So we started being criticized. An eminent editor gave the tag or called it the biggest gamble in history. Another magazine organizer, very renowned magazine of those days, wrote that Jawaharlal Nehru, because he happened to be the Prime Minister, so he wrote Jawaharlal Nehru would live to confess the failure of universal adult franchise in India. Means this is a wrong step. India must not have decided to go with universal adult franchise. And a British member of ICS, of Indian Civil Service, is telling that a future and more enlightened age, will view with astonishment the absurd farce of recording the votes of millions of illiterate people. They are telling that what's the need of recording the votes of illiterate people, that to millions of illiterate people. This is the absurd farce, and they won't believe it. That's why it's telling a future and more enlightened age. Means they would be in the coming days, whosoever will come, they will be extraordinary people, they would be intellectual, and people of those days were not intellectual. Fine. We decided to go against all these odds, children. See how bold our step was. While everything started, every possible steps we took, but we had to postpone our election twice. Finally, the time came and it was held from October 1951 to February 1952. Okay, October 1951 to February 1952, and it is known as 1952 general election, because in most part of our country election had taken place, country voted in January 1952, but exactly started in October 1951. So 51-52 election we also tell it, and it took almost 6 months for the campaigning, for the polling, for the counting to be completed, because those days you didn't have EVMs. It was manual counting. Even the voting we used to have the ballot paper. Okay. Elections were really interesting one. Elections were competitive, and when we go for the number, then on an average 4 candidates for each seat we had. Okay, 4 candidates for each seat. So it was election, and participation level was really encouraging. More than half of our eligible voters, means more than 50% of the voters, they turned out on the day of election. And when the results were declared, now the final day came, declaration of result. When the results were declared, the whole world, the entire world had no other option except to give thumbs up, kudos, to give kudos to our system, our think tank, our policymakers, that India took such a bold and risky step, and India succeeded. Results were accepted as fair and justified even by the losers who lost the election. They also accepted it wholeheartedly. They accepted. Okay. Then every critics, our experiment proved every critics wrong. And now the reactions. What we started finding, what has been written in Times of India. The polls have confounded all those skeptics who thought that introduction of adult franchise too risky and experiment in this country. Means every apprehension has been rejected. We proved that a decisive step when any head of the states and a country like India thinks, plans and moves ahead, goes ahead, then result used to be like this. Next we are finding what had been told in the Hindustan Times. There is universal agreement that the Indian people have conducted themselves admirably in the largest experiment in democratic elections in the history of the world. Yes, I am repeating it. There is universal agreement that the Indian people have concluded themselves admirably in the largest experiment in democratic elections in the history of the world. This has been published by Hindustan Times. Are you getting? So, observers outside the country, across the globe, they were highly impressed. They were equally impressed, okay, with the result. And our first general election of 1952, it became a landmark in the history of democracy, in the history of political democracy of the world, across the globe, all over the world. There was no point left thereafter to argue further, to go with the argument that should democratic elections be held in a conditions of poverty or lack of education. It was proved that democratic elections could be held anywhere. Means it was no longer possible to argue, now needless to argue, that democratic elections could not be held in conditions of poverty or lack of education. It was proved now, or we say that in the mathematical term, hence proved that democracy could be practiced anywhere in the world. It hardly matters in which country, in which continent. If you do have the guts, you do have the courage, your thinking is genuine, you could plan and you could execute your policy, your planning, then there is no need to have second thought. Just go ahead with sound mind, with proper planning. Fine, children? So, this was how the first election took place in our country. That was 1952. And audit and which party dominated, that we will keep discussing. Hope you must have enjoyed the lesson. Okay, go through the text, jot down the main points, despite the fact all the keywords and main points had been given for you. Okay, and do whatsoever notes or assignment being given to you. Thank you. Have a good day. Take care.